So, what Don is saying is that through a variety of media, including a spot during the Danny Thomas show, if you can afford it, we can really boost awareness.
Then, a 10% off coupon in select ladies' magazines will increase your first-time visitors. Once we get them into the store, the rest is kind of up to you.
Mr. Draper, our store is 60 years old. We share a wall with Tiffany's. Honestly, a coupon?
Miss Mencken, coupons work. I think your father would agree with the strategy.
He might. But he's not here because we just had our lowest sales year ever. So I suppose what I think matters most right now.
Miss Mencken, why did you come here? There are a dozen other agencies better suited to your needs.
If I wanted some man who happened to be from the same village as my father to manage my account, I could have stayed where I was. Their research favors coupons, too.
It's not just research, Miss Mencken. Housewives love coupons.
I'm not interested in housewives.
What kind of people do you want?
I want your kind of people, Mr. Draper. People who don't care about coupons, whether or not they can afford it. People who are coming to the store because it is expensive.
Well, we obviously have very different ideas.
Yes, like the customer is always right. Gentlemen, I really thought you could do better than this. Sterling Cooper has a reputation for being innovative.
Miss, you are way out of line.
Don, please. Let's not get emotional here. There's no reason we can't talk this out.
Talk about what? This silly idea that people are going to come to some store they've never been to because it's more expensive?
It works for Chanel.
Menken's is not Chanel.
That's a vote of confidence.
What Don's saying is Chanel is a very different kind of place. It's French, it's continental, it's...
Not just another Jewish department store?
Exactly.
You were right, Roger. This place really runs on charm.
Mad Men was a study in identities, of characters, and of brands. Don Draper, played by John Hamm, is a master of fabrications and storytelling. He understands what motivates Americans of the time, even if he doesn't understand himself. The show explores the brand strategy behind some of the most iconic brands, and in this scene, he even discusses a still prevalent strategy of driving sales, the coupon. But Rachel Mencken, played by Maggie Siff, wants more for her brand. She wants the kind of emotive loyalty enjoyed by Chanel. It's the kind of loyalty that buoys sales without transactional loyalty programs. Chris Gillen, the CEO of A Closer Look, understands that emotive loyalty transcends price schemes and loyalty programs. But long-established brands are failing to connect with younger generations and rapidly changing customer expectations. He joins the show to discuss how brands can and must adapt, while illustrating the fate of brands that failed to do so. This week on Next in Queue, Chris and I discuss the evolution of customer experience research, understanding emotive loyalty in the new consumer, the invisible gap in brand perception, the impact of availability on brand perception, the shift in consumer expectations, the future of retail, and the value of frontline workers. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at happitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Thanks for joining another episode of Next in Queue. Today, I am joined by Chris Gillen. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Rob. Great. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you today.
I am too. Now, Chris, you are the CEO of A Closer Look, a research firm, which we'll talk about a little bit. But I think just to frame things, people should know that you've worked with some of the largest brands out there. I'm talking Toys R Us, Target,
Yeah.
Home Depot, just to name a few. And these aren't little stints where you're, just working as an associate. You're doing some big things with these companies.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about brands and some of the shifting things that are going on out there in the marketplace. But before we get there, number one, people should recognize that you have your beard under control.
That's right.
A little bit more than me. I've got a wild thing going on lately. I don't think my wife necessarily appreciates it, but it's still cold here in the Midwest. Tell us about a closer look.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thanks for having me, Rob. I've been a fan of this podcast, and it's nice to be a part of it. And we're going to talk about my favorite subject, which is the changing nature of all things customer experience. And it's a great time to talk about it. But let me just tell you a little bit about a closer look. I've been here now going into my 6th year as the CEO of a closer look. Company's been around a lot longer than that, though. It's been over 30 years. It was started 30 years ago by 3 individuals. Started as a traditional mystery shopping company. So about 150,000 independent contractors on our network. And we still do a lot of mystery shopping today. I would say we're in the top 5 of the most premier mystery shop companies in North America. But over the last 5 years, we've really evolved because we recognize that the world is changing, things are changing. And so we've really kind of evolved ourselves into more of a customer experience research data analytics company. And we did that because we've really been hyper-focused the last several years on building new innovative products, ways for our customers to actually go deep on what the actual customer experience looks like. Not just scraping, Google reviews and things of that nature. We have tools that allow, whether it's mystery shopping, and we can send our evaluators out and collect any level of information you want. We have survey tools. We have competitive intelligence tools. We're launching a really cool app in a couple of weeks that we think is going to kind of change the game in terms of how consumers and brands hold each other accountable for things. And so that's really been the labor of love for us for the last several years, is just evolving. And we have, probably 250, almost 300 clients that we work with, all verticals. So it's retail, restaurant, hospitality. We do a lot of work in senior living. And that's really cool, Rob, because it gives me purview into what's happening in all of those verticals. And there's so many similarities to whether you're in restaurants or hospitality, retail, that these changes, what I refer to around consumerism changes, are really kind of shaking things up across all verticals. So that's a little bit about the company. We have almost 50 people in the company. We operate out of the Philippines, Colombia, Kenya. So we're a globally distributed team of people. And we just love working with brands and really helping them get to the bottom of how they can create a better customer experience, especially when we talk about an emotive experience. So it's a lot of fun. I've got a great team of people, and we love the brands that we get to help.
I love that. And you just said a word that I want to dig into, and that is emotive. Let's talk about loyalty, and in particular, emotive loyalty. This is a term that I have learned from you, but help us understand what exactly that means.
Sure. Oh, man. So let me paint a picture for you, just because I think we have to start at a 100,000 foot level to really understand this. So if you think about the last 70 years, and we're just going to talk about the United States, right? But this could apply globally. If you look at the last 70 years, the consumer narrative has been controlled by the baby boomer generation, right? Large generation. Mm-hmm. They've decided what brands are in and what brands are out and who's successful and who isn't. I'm a Gen Xer. And so I've kind of followed closely in my parents and my grandparents' kind of footsteps. So the restaurants that they went to, I went to, because those are the restaurants, right? But as you get farther away from that generation and you get into some of these, what we refer to as the new consumer, and the new consumer is far more tech savvy. They're thinking about things differently, right? What's important to them is different. What's happening is you have the whole consumer consumption narrative changing. right? That's why you're seeing brands have been around for 50 and 60 years suddenly go out of business because they're no longer relevant. So in that, one of the things that's driving those changes, Rob, is inflation. Things are expensive all over. I mean, I can't go to the grocery store. It's just my wife and I. I can't go to the grocery store and walk out with anything less than $100, and I got a little bag. I'm like, what did I just spend my money on, right?
Yeah, we're all feeling that.
We're
for
all
sure.
feeling that, right? We're all feeling that. And so what's happened now, if you go back to those last 70 years, loyalty has been defined as transactional loyalty, meaning you sign up for my app or my program, and I'm going to reward you the more you spend. The more often you come in, the more you come in, and the more you buy with me, right? The problem with that is that inflation's reached a point where you can't afford to do that anymore. Maybe, 5 years ago, you could go to your favorite burger joint twice a week and you're earning those points and those things. Now it's too expensive. So now you might be going once every other week, right, to eat. So what's happening is all of these businesses that have used transactional loyalty as a driver of revenue and customer acquisition for the last 50 years, it's not working anymore, right? People they're not signing up. And I'm not saying that it's not valid. It still is a valid form of what that, but what's happening is it's forcing people to think differently. And so instead of now being value driven, the more I go and spend, the more I'm going to earn, what we're seeing with what we refer to as the new consumer is they want a deeper relationship. They want their values and the brand values to align. And price isn't as important as it once was because everything's expensive. And so now, limited wallet share, I have to figure out where I'm going to go spend my money. I'm not just going to go to the place that has the cheapest hamburger. I'm going to go to the place that I can identify the most with. And that's kind of what we're seeing is that price is becoming less of a driver than other forms of connection, like emotive connection, meaning you look at some highly emotive brands, right? Tesla, Apple, Lululemon. I mean, these are brands that when you talk to people, they're passionate about, right? And so that's that development of emotive loyalty. And that's what we're seeing kind of things move towards, where the new consumer is really more interested in, do I have a connection with this brand? Is this brand a reflection of me? Do their values and my values align? And what am I looking for there, right? It's not just the price component. So it's a really interesting time to help businesses really kind of understand you don't have to get rid of your transactional loyalty program. It's still a strong form of that, but you have to start thinking about other ways to connect with the consumer beyond just being value driven. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I am thinking about some of the changes that we're seeing in various industries. One of the ones that I've been keeping up with a little bit, and part of it is because there's such a lag on it, is the alcohol industry, right?
Yeah.
So bourbon and scotch has enjoyed just this tremendous growth and demand for many, many years. But what you see with alcohol in general is generational shifts in preference. But even now, that industry is grappling with a younger generation that's saying, you know what? Maybe we don't want to drink anymore. Maybe we don't want actually to experience alcohol. And there's an entire industry that is struggling to adapt and change so that they can remain profitable.
Yeah.
And you talked about businesses, brands going under that have been around for a long time. One of which I know that you worked for, Toys R Us. But can you talk about some of those examples and why they're not all just related to the fact that it's brick and mortar versus ordering online?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm 100% in agreement on the alcohol thing. If you talk to anybody 35 and younger, chances are they're going to say that we don't drink, we do mocktails and, no alcohol kind of stuff. And I see that when I go out too. If I'm out, I see more people drinking zero alcohol beer or mocktails, things of that nature. And yes, that's the type of consumer shift that's baffling businesses right now. Like, well, this isn't a price thing. So it's not just me lowering price and suddenly everybody's going to be clamoring back. That has nothing to do with it. It's that transactional loyalty. So they're having to rethink about how they stay relevant. Toys R Us is a good example of a brand that could not stay relevant, right? Here's a brand that's been around for a very long time, one of the most recognizable global brands. Most people that grew up in the 70s, 80s, early 90s remember the Toys R Us song. I mean, it was this really iconic thing and a cool brand. But what happened is they failed to stay relevant. So even back then, technology was becoming more prominent. Kids weren't playing board games and, playing with toys as much. It was this big electronic movement. And Toys R Us could never get themselves in a position to shift to that, right? They were just what I refer to, they were too big of a ship that just couldn't be nimble when they turned. And then they just clamored. They couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure out the strategy. They couldn't figure out what they needed to do to stay relevant. And so they pulled out all the old tricks and things of that nature. And of course, it didn't go anywhere, which is sad because what an emotive experience. I mean, I spent time at the Toys R Us that used to be on Times Square, and you went in there and it was just like FAO Schwartz, in New York. I mean, these were really iconic brands that offered some level of connection and attachment beyond just, what they sold, but they could just never get the formula right. And they were too late. It was really too late. And if I'm being candid, it was really more of a kind of a corporate greed thing. One more year, we'll wait one more year to push for an IPO, and they got greedy and things tanked and they just never could recover because they were too leveraged with debt. But it goes, but it's a warning for brands now. Like when you look at Joanne Fabrics, you look at Party City, you look at Red Lobster, these brands that are just, they're struggling. JC Penney's, I just saw they connected with a much larger group. They're trying everything they can to say, how do we stay relevant? But they continue to miss the boat, and they continue to miss the boat because they just keep pulling out of the same playbook. Right. I love when I see these brands, Rob, say we're going back to basics, because you're assuming that going back to basics will make you relevant again. And they're not realizing how massively things are shifting around consumerism, around work. I mean, all things right now. So it is really important for all brands, I don't care who you are, all brands to keep their finger tightly on the pulse of the experience and what's happening. And if they're losing revenue and they're losing foot traffic, like many of them are, the first thing they have to do is take that old playbook and they have to throw it out the window. And they've got to say, this is a different time. These are different expectations. It's a different consumer. The world's changed. What do I need to do with this new consumer to stay relevant? Some of them will figure it out, but the reality of it is, especially in the retail space, you're going to continue to see more bankruptcies. Because retail just cannot figure it out.
I mean, if you listen to most CEOs of any type of retail establishment, they'll tell you they're doing all of the right things,
right?
And that they're right. They'll tout whatever survey metrics they have and all the things that they're doing. Is there a gap that exists between what's actually occurring in these locations and how the executive team is perceiving what they're doing?
Well, and this is not new. This is something that's been in all business for a very long time. But I think now what's happening, it's becoming more prominent. And it's what we refer to as the invisible gap. And the invisible gap exists because you get senior leaders that sit in their headquarters and they look at numbers, and they look at spreadsheets, and they say, yes, these things are all happening in my locations. That's why we're driving the numbers we're driving. They oftentimes rely on their regional and their district managers or their auditors to go out and assess what's happening and then bubble that information back up. Not a bad thing to do. I've spent 35 years in retail. I've done my share of store visits and audits. However, what we try to remind people is that every one of those is biased. I'm certainly, if I'm a regional manager and I have 50 stores and I'm going around and I got a store that's really bad, I'm not going to necessarily tell you how bad it is. And so what ends up happening, not maliciously, this is just part of business, is that the senior leaders who are not out in the field as often start believing what they're seeing. And then they just assume that all these things are happening. When you do an independent assessment, whether that's customer surveys or mystery shops or take your pick, that is your opportunity to get an unbiased assessment of kind of what's happening. And why more businesses don't do this is always baffling to me, because it's just independent validation. And, it's funny that we're talking about this because literally just today on LinkedIn, one of the things that we've been doing along this invisible gap is we've been sending our evaluators out on our own nickel to assess what some of these CEOs are coming out and publicly saying in the news you can expect as a consumer. We want to know if that's actually happening. So we did this in December for Starbucks because their CEO has come out and said, these are all the things that you can expect. And so we sent evaluators out to 50 different locations across the US. And we said, go look for these things. Are these things happening? And it's fascinating because you do find some things that are going well. And you're like, all right, that's great. But more often than not, you'll find at least 2 or 3 of those things that the senior leaders have said you can expect not working in those locations. And we just dropped one today for Kava, if you know Kava Restaurant Group, which is, fantastic. I mean, in terms of their performance, a quarter over quarter revenue growth, they're really growing. Their CEO has been all over the news talking about all the great things you can experience. And so I hope your people check it out just on our Closer Look LinkedIn page to see the results of it. Because our belief is, listen, if you're going to go out and say to the consumer who's spending their money with your business that this is what they can expect, then you owe them the courtesy of doing everything you can to make sure that that's what they get consistently every time they walk into your building. And so that's that invisible gap piece where we say it's just a disconnect, right? And you've got to put processes in place that give you unbiased validation that these things are actually happening.
Yeah. It strikes me just in the contact center world, and when we talk about quality, one of the things that I have long held was when you have quality being assessed by people, there's a little bit of a bias, particularly if these people report to me, right?
That's right.
It's a reflection of
Exactly.
my own performance.
Yeah.
And that holds true in any type of business sense, particularly once you get some scale, right?
Yeah.
These are my locations.
Yeah.
And the incentives are around performance. And if I'm looking at them, right, I want them to perform, but I'm also going to protect them a little bit, right? They're my people, and I have an incentive to that. I wonder how much, as you scale up, I work for a relatively small company. I've worked for really, really large companies. And one of the things that strikes me is there's some different challenges as you get bigger. Do you see that as well in the space of trying to ensure those kinds of consistencies that the executive team is saying, hey, we deliver on X, Y, and Z, and then the bigger you get, the harder it is to have consistency?
Yeah. There are 4 elements that make up emotive loyalty in our mind. It's connection. What am I connecting with you on? It's not just price, right? It's like, I have a product or service you want or need, or, you like, it fits into your lifestyle. How am I building that connection? Personalization. How am I making that unique for you, right? Every time you come in. Consistency, meaning I should be able to go to any location anywhere and get the same level of experience, the same food quality, whatever it is. And investment. What am I doing to keep you, coming back? So of those 4, Rob, consistency is the killer. It's the one that always shakes down brands as they grow. You start with one location, you have total control on that location. You can micromanage every element of the experience because it's your business.
Mm-hmm.
But then you start franchising, and then you grow to 30, 40, 50 with other people running it. It's harder to maintain the integrity of what made the business successful in the first place. This is why you hear, somebody that, finds a little mom and pop, loves it, and then they end up growing, and then they start opening places otherwhere, and then you go somewhere in a different city and you eat and you go, that wasn't as good. It wasn't as good as what is over here. That's that consistency issue, which is really, really important because it's cognitive dissonance, right? So you get conditioned to experience something every time you go, right? That's what that conditioning is. So if every time you go to, your favorite restaurant and you expect the hamburger to taste a certain way, that's what you expect. The minute that it doesn't, it causes you emotional pain. And that pain is, oh, this isn't what I thought I was going to get. And then it changes the experience for you. And it's one of the number one things where you always hear people going out. I love it when they're saying, yeah, that place is really going downhill, or boy, that place isn't as good as it used to be, because they've lost their ability to maintain control and integrity across all of those locations.
I am trying to hold back the laughter because what you are saying hits home so hard with me. First of all, I think one of the most iconic brands that for a long time really got it right was McDonald's.
Yeah.
Right. When you talk about consistency and going into different locations, like the menu was there, the food was very consistent.
Yes.
I would argue that maybe they're not as consistent today as they used to be.
Yeah.
And their scale is as big a scale as you can possibly get.
Yeah.
But there are other, we'll just say, nameless quick serve restaurants that I've experienced. And I'm a person that doesn't eat out very often. It tends to happen when I travel.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that more often than not anymore, those experiences, like my expectations aren't, right? It's a quick serve restaurant, right? Mm-hmm. It's fast food. My expectations are not up here. But even if they're here, and what I get is well below that,
right,
it sours everything about it. It's just like, oh, why did I spend the money on this? Yes. And then I just don't ever want to go back again.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And what I remind people about that is that, if I love the brand, I'll give you an example. One of my favorite hamburger chains is Whataburger, right? It's a Texas-based chain. They're expanding, love them, grew up with them. And so as they've expanded, I expect that hamburger to taste the exact same way, to get the same level of service, all of that. And that hasn't been the case. Sorry, Whataburger, if you're watching, but it hasn't been the case, right? It's been very, very inconsistent because Whataburger never expanded. Like their growth, they were in Texas. They were able to keep it tight, keep everything. And now that they're growing and they're pushing it out there, their food quality is changing. It's different. The service levels are different because they're expanding and they're not able to keep control anymore, tight control over curating exactly what that experience will look like. And it's hard. It's a challenge as you scale and as you grow. But there are tools and programs and processes out there that would allow you to do that. I always talk about Outback Steakhouse. Used to be the most consistent food chain I would eat at, because in retail, I traveled a lot too. I was on the road 4 or 5 days a week, right? And so if I saw an Outback, I always knew that that they had stuff I wanted. I always knew what the experience would be and what the quality was going to be, no matter where I went across the U.S. It was the same everywhere. That's not the case anymore, and you look at their performance is slipping. The food standards are different. The expectation is different. They've lost the control. And I think most brands just fail to understand how important that consistent experience is. So that doesn't have to be perfect, to your point, but you've got to deliver on those core elements consistently every single time. That's what will keep people coming back, because you may have a poor experience and you may be soured, but not enough to leave the brand completely. But if it happens to you enough times, you won't go back. You'll be done. And I have a laundry list of brands where I've said, okay, last chance, I'm not going back there anymore.
So I have a question about growth and about the impact availability has on your perception of a brand. And I'm going to talk very specifically about a brand that, for me, up until recently, was a little bit harder to get, right? Okay. I'm going to go back to the alcohol industry. There's a beer called Yingling. It's one of the oldest breweries in the United States, out of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
I live in the Midwest, and it used to be that their distribution network was limited. So the closest I could ever get it was if I was in Tennessee for some reason, whether it was work or pleasure. And my wife knew it was a thing. Like, I'm going to come home with a trunk full of Yingling because I can't get it at home,
Yeah.
right? And then they established another brewery, I believe in Texas. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, but now I can get it, right? It's not the same for me, and it's not a consistency issue,
Yeah.
which is one of those four foundations.
Yep.
But I wonder if you can talk about availability, because for me, there is less of an emotional, ooh, I get to go get this draw than there was before, because now it's just available. Like, I can go out and get it at any liquor store today.
Right.
And have it. And I'm thinking of other brands where they don't have that growth. I have to go to a place to experience that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing. So I'm a student of retail. I grew up in retail. Retail's in my blood, right? 30 plus years. There's nothing worse than going in, driving, getting in your car, going to a physical location, could be your favorite liquor store or retail or whatever, with the expectation that you're going to go buy something, and then you get in there and it's not available. It's out of stock. It's not on the shelf, right? It's the most frustrating part. And this is one of the big reasons I think it drives people to shop online, right? So if you ask people about that, we just did a big survey about out of stocks, and it's available on our website for free, about how people feel. How does it affect you when you go? And people get really irritated when they physically take time and energy to go to a place, only to find that it's either out of stock, unavailable, you don't have my size, whatever. And it kind of goes back to that experience. You leave going, one, you're frustrated that they didn't have it. You expected them to have it. It was out of stock. And then you think to yourself, well, you know what? Shoot, I'll just go online and buy it. And that's what everybody kind of thinks, is like, oh, I can just go online and buy it because of the ease and the convenience. And it's low effort. It's the lowest level of effort you can get. So now, all that to say, Rob, that I still put a lot of stock on the physical experience. I just think it needs to change. And part of that change is ensuring that those, that they have the product that people want, that they're keeping it available, that it's in stock for them, that they have a plan when it isn't. I mean, I posted something months ago about my Best Buy experience trying to buy headphones, and first off, I had to get over the walled, locked showcases that you have to go find somebody to get in, only to find that when they did that they were out of stock on the product. So I wasted all of that time for nothing. I stood in that store, went right on Amazon, and they had the product shipped to my house in 24 hours. How do you compete with that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be tight. And if you think about how do brands monitor today, here's my best example. There's all of these small businesses that sell their products into places like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, right? Small businesses that are trying to thrive. They're relying solely on that business to stock that shelf and make sure that their product is out. And the only way they know that happens, typically, if they're not able to go out and drive around and look, is through their sales sheet. Am I selling? But then you might get to a location and go, well, I haven't sold any product in a month, only to find out that the store staff has never stocked it, right? So it's a real damper on the customer experience when the product that you took time to go get is out of stock, and there's no plan. Because like stores, the reality is stores can't stock everything. They may not have your size, but this is where you get the omni-channel and the physical experience blending together to create a new experience where, I want to go to a physical location and I want to touch and feel things, because there's just some things I don't want to buy, but I want to be catered to when I go. I want an expert to talk to me about the product and what it is and all that. I don't care how I get it, whether I leave with it today or I order it and it shows up 24 hours. That's that experience that I think a lot of retailers in particular are really missing. They're not able to blend the two effectively to still create this really cool experience when you go in. You remember the day back in the heyday of Best Buy. Sometimes I would just go to Best Buy to look at the stuff, and just see, right? And just touch and feel and do all of that. And that you would get a knowledgeable person that'd be able to walk you through stuff. Now you walk into one of their stores, you're lucky if anybody says boo to you, when you're in there.
Mhm.
And so all of that kind of ties in, I think, and we're actually launching, I'm really excited about it because one of the things that we believe, Rob, is that the consumer and their brands could work together for the betterment of the experience, right? So if I'm already going to Best Buy to go look for something, if there was a way for somebody to tell me, hey, while you're in that store, can you just walk over and take a picture of this display or take a picture of this end cap? And imagine thousands of people going out to these locations and doing that. They're earning a little bit of money, kind of a gig economy kind of thing. But all that data is being fed back to headquarters or to a location so that they're getting real-time crowdsourced intelligence on whether their end caps are full, what the food in a restaurant looks like, this kind of whole concept of that, because part of it's just intelligence. I just have no way to know, is my shelf full? Is it not full? Is there product available? Is there not product available? And sometimes just a simple picture can go a long way instantaneously to help people figure out, well, I'm missing product. So I'll go back to that example where maybe I'm selling, my beard cream right into Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. And imagine now if there was a way for me as a small business to get crowdsourced information. Is my product on the shelf, right? Is it there? Is it? And then for me to get that in real time, go, you know what, it isn't. Let me call that location and say, Rob, my product's on the shelf. Can somebody go put it on the shelf? That's cool stuff, right? Because then what you get is you get this dynamic between the consumer and the business kind of working together. Everybody gets a little skin in the game, if you will, for how it works. So those are the kind of things that we're thinking about to help change the dynamic around some of this, to provide retailers or restaurants or whoever with some really cool tools and technology to create a better engagement with their customer, because at the end of the day, that's what they need to do to be able to survive.
You brought up something, and it just makes me think of the overall strategy when we talk about retailers that have both retail and an online presence, right? Yeah. I can go into a physical store that they manage and buy, or I can order online. And I am thinking of a specific retailer that'll remain nameless, but those operations run completely siloed from each other, right? So if I buy it in the store, I have to take it back to the store. Yeah. That transaction is strictly with the store. Yeah. If I buy it online, then I got to call and return it online. Yeah. And that's a strategic miss, I think, for that company in not really, we talk about omni-channel when it comes to communications, right? That's a big contact center kind of jargon that we throw around. Right. But really the omni-channel that I want to experience as a consumer is with this brand. Yeah. If I walk in and you don't have my size, but I do know, yes, I want that. Let's get it. That you can just have it sent to me.
Exactly.
How many brands today are just doing exactly that, operating in that old school way and just totally missing the boat?
I think most of them. I mean, I think with the exception of maybe like Bose and some of your higher end, electronics where they have smaller square footage stores that are more experiential. I go in and I listen, and a knowledgeable person is telling me about it. And then I'm just, okay, yeah, let me hit buy. And then I go home and it's there 24 hours later. So many brands are missing that, all right, because they're stuck in this old traditional retail model. I'll use Best Buy because I like to pick on Best Buy as an example. They have these huge stores that they built in the 70s and the 80s, right? They have all this inventory in them, packed out all over the floor, right? All this stuff that if you go into any Best Buy and take your finger across it, it's just collecting dust because nobody's buying it. What an opportunity for them to shrink the square footage of their stores, to go back to making that more of an experiential, because they have a great e-commerce online program, to making that visit more experiential, where I'm walking in and I'm hearing and listening and touching, and I have a knowledgeable person explaining and answering my questions, right? So that I get to the end of the transaction and there's no inventory in the store. And just say, okay, Rob, you good? You want it? Great. I push a button, it'll be delivered to you in 24 hours. Why more brands are not doing that? And I think part of it is just they're all huge ships and they can't turn, and they've got all this inventory that's piling up and building up in their store locations that they end up writing off at the end of the year, and it's not an easy thing for them to do, right? But in my mind, that is the future. It is the future of what that will look like, because there's still merit in, if I'm buying toilet paper, I don't care. I know what it is. I go to Amazon and I buy it, right? But I'm certainly not going to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a 4K OLED TV without actually looking at it and understanding what it is and the size and the dimensions. And sometimes you just need to touch it and feel it. And then you need an expert, somebody who's well versed. It's the Home Depot model. What Home Depot was built on, it was built on this fact that you could walk into their locations, they had what you needed, but more importantly, you were talking to an electrician or a plumber or a carpenter. And so part of that wasn't just getting the product, it was the experience of having these knowledgeable resources there to be able to help you. Not the case anymore, right? Now you walk in, you talk to an 18-year-old kid who has no idea where the toilets are, right? And so all that has changed because we've moved away from that old model of engagement and really creating an experience to this idea that everybody wants ultimate convenience. They don't want to talk to anybody. They just want to come in, get their stuff and leave. And there is certainly an element of the population that wants that. But I think what we're seeing with this younger generation is a complete reset and redo on what they expect going forward. That's why everybody's got to toss the playbook. They got to stop going back to the same plays over and over, and they've really got to start thinking differently.
Yeah. About a year ago, I did an episode with David Allison of Value Graphics, and we talked a little bit about the same subject, right? And that is that it's not just the product, but does your brand align with what I value?
Yes.
And I do think that in this pursuit of growth for a lot of brands, like I want to sell to everyone and I want to become the biggest, that there is a challenge in trying to align with your ideal customers' values, because I need to appeal to a really large audience.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes back to that scale piece. Like, it becomes a real challenge to tell a compelling story that resonates with people if I also want to just continue to grow and grow and grow. And we certainly see that in a lot of businesses. But are those really large businesses? Are they? I mean, we've seen it. We've talked about it a little bit, but are a lot of other big name retailers in for big trouble because they've just gotten so big that they can't align with values?
Yeah. I think that, yes, to answer your question, retail is got probably another 5 years of a horribly bumpy road before we start to see real changes in what the retail experience looks like. And I say that because you're going to see more bankruptcies. I mean, you're already starting to see the fallout. How much longer does JCPenney's have? How much longer does Container Store have? All of these kind of brands that are just struggling. And again, I go back to what I said before. Last 70 years, they've kind of built their whole model on that particular consumer. What is important to that consumer? And price and, a lot of other things are important, hence all the transactional loyalty. It's not the case with this consumer. So brands are having to find out, what is that connection, that first element? Like, why? I love this little exercise I do with people sometimes where I say, if you don't tell me anything about yourself, tell me the 2 brands that you most align with that define you. Like that you would just say, I can only tell you about who I am by telling you 2 or 3 brands, right? Because it says a lot about somebody when they say, these are my favorite brands. And then you ask them why, and then you find that it isn't, well, they have the best price. That may be one little component, but I resonate with it because of this. Like, Lululemon fans are maniacal. Like, if you talk to anybody who shops at Lululemon, I mean, they're all over it because it defines them, right? It kind of this, I'm into yoga, I'm into fitness, I'm into this stuff. And so you see somebody wearing Lululemon, you automatically kind of have a perception about that person. That's a brand defining the consumer and the consumer being defined by the brand. And not every brand is going to do this. We talk about it in terms of a handshake and a hug. There are some brands that you just have a handshake with, right? It's transactional. I go there, I have to buy gas. So gas might be the best price, right? And I go there and I'm like, okay, yeah, I buy my gas here because you have a good price. Then there's a hug, and a hug is a much more intimate thing, right? It's a brand that goes beyond just you using it or consuming it. It defines you as a person. And that's what people are looking for, I think now. Like, it's a statement when you see me. Tesla owners, Apple, people who are on Apple. I mean, these are all examples. REI is a great example of a very purpose-driven brand. And their stuff isn't cheap. So it's not price, but they got a lot of people going there because they're connecting with it on a different level. And that's what I would say is what a lot of these older retail brands need to do is really take a step back and really understand this new consumer. What are they looking for? Because it's not the same, right? They're looking for things that are different. And then how do I recraft or retailor my brand to be part of their journey as they come up? Some brands are going to figure it out, Rob, and I'm sure they'll be there. But there's other brands that I just think are built on this really old, archaic model that are just too big to be nimble and to move quickly, that I think you're gonna see go out of business.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. I do want to ask you about the customer service experience with brands. Obviously, I come from a background where it's all about the customer service side of things, particularly within the contact center. And I think there are a lot of brands who you would say they don't offer the best service. And I hear you talking about how this experience is really important. And why aren't these brands offering better customer service? Even you talked about Best Buy, right?
Yeah.
You go in and I don't get the same experience. It's not this consultation. It's just people who are there stocking shelves, maybe if there's anything to stock, or waiting for you to come check out. Why is that? Why aren't they doing a better job with the customer service?
Well, I'm going to give you the honest, real answer. I think that is the real answer, which is you could sit down every CEO of every major company and you can ask them, how important is customer service in your business? And they're all going to give you the standard stock answer. Incredibly important. We take care of our customers, blah, 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 right? But then if you were to take that one step farther and kind of dig into their financials and see where they were spending their money, what you're going to find is they don't spend a lot of money on service. And they don't because they look at it as an expense. And I know this because it's exactly how they looked at it at Toys R Us. Every year somebody would come to me and say, can you cut $2 million out of the call center budget? Yeah. I mean, do you care if service erodes or not? Well, do your best, So we would go and we would cut $2 million out of the budget by closed loop IVRing or different stuff to kind of, and so I say that, and again, not a blanket statement. I mean, we can't apply this to every company, but for the most part, I will tell you the senior leaders of most companies have a hard time tying back the return on investment of what real customer service looks like. And, you have metrics like Net Promoter Score, been around 30 years. You've got, customer level of effort. You got all these statistics, but none of those really tell you, yeah, you can look at it operationally. Am I lowering my cost per contact? Yes, but it's expense driven. When you start trying to tie that stuff back to real, tangible profit improvement, revenue increase, like what is it doing? It gets really challenging. And so C leaders sit around the table and they understand it. They say, yes, I've got to say yes, that service is important. But the reality of it is, in most of these companies, these people leading the service experience are struggling. They can't get the money they need. They can't get the resources they need. I sat at a conference in Amsterdam last year with a number of businesses around the table. All of these people were leading the CX, customer service experience, in their brands. And these are well-known brands. And it turned into this whole thing of like, I can't convince my senior leaders to give me more money. I can't convince them that great customer service will translate to more foot traffic and better revenue. They're not seeing it. So they funnel the money in different places that they think are important. And they don't put enough emphasis on the customer experience. And so my question is, is it all this stuff that we've been talking about for 25 years? Is it real or is it BS? Right? Because to your point, there are still brands out there that give horrible service, yet customers keep going and they keep having the experience and they keep doing that. I mean, you can argue telecom, right? AT&T probably is the one company that's known most often for the worst customer service ever. And I have AT&T. I don't like to call them because it is a bad experience, but people still keep buying AT&T.
Yeah.
Right. And so you look at that and you go, it's a real thing. Like this whole CX industry, billion-dollar industry, all these people consulting and doing this, our stuff included. Part of our big issue is just trying to convince brands that excellent customer service, while it may not be immediate, will lead to growth for you if you put your money where your mouth is. That's why we've been doing this, where these CEOs are coming out saying, here's all the service related things you can expect. Well, I'm going to go check. I'm going to see if that's actually really, really happening. And every consumer should do that. Every consumer, if you're spending your money at these brands and they're telling you this is what you could expect, if you're not getting what you expect consistently, vote with your wallet. Go somewhere else. That's how you show these brands that CX is important.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up AT&T, and I think I have felt like that's in telecom, it's a challenge, right?
Yeah.
My choices are pretty limited.
They're limited.
I can go to T-Mobile or Verizon and maybe I'll get better service or maybe I won't. Outside of that, right, I don't have a lot of choice. I can go prepaid. Right. That's what I can do. And prepaid, the service is going to be even worse. Yeah. So I do think there's an element of that, but I love that you bring up, because I want to just talk about this a little bit, the consumer piece of it. Mm. And I feel like from a brand perspective, humans are notoriously bad at long-term thinking. Mm. Like we are just not good at it. We focus on short-term.
Yep.
And it's not surprising then that companies focus on short term.
Yeah.
And often there are financial incentives to focus on short term as well.
Right.
And the long-term investment that comes from really developing customer experience, it takes a lot of time to pay dividends. You talked about it's challenging, but do we as consumers bear a little bit of the responsibility for not voting with our wallets?
Yeah, 100%, man. We're culpable as consumers. And I would say, if you're the person that keeps going back to the brand over and over, spending your money, and every time you go, you get terrible service, you've lost your right to complain about it because you keep going there, and I ask this question sometimes when people will post something, you see some of these people posting on LinkedIn about their bad experience. And sometimes I'll ask them, okay, so are you not going back to the brand? Are you done with them? Well, I didn't say that. And so sometimes, the product, the service, whatever it is, might, force you, if you have limited options, to kind of put up with that because you may not have options, or it may just be too convenient. But every time a consumer does that, you're just sending the message that it doesn't matter, that how you treat me, where I go, and the experience that I have is not important to me. And I think that fuels some of the thinking that the C leaders have as well, as they look at it and they say, I see all these negative comments on social and I'm getting bad reviews, but my quarterly numbers were crushing it last year. So does it even matter how I'm treating you? And that's where I say all the time, until companies and senior leaders realize that CX is a revenue generating concept, not an expense concept, you're going to continue to see it. Cut it, do this, eliminate agents, all of these things, because they're just they're thinking about it as an expense right now, whatever they can do. They're not thinking about it, just like you said, Rob, which is, this is not something that was going to change your numbers immediately, but you're going to grow that base and people are going to become more and more loyal over time. They're going to spend more money. They're going to be more forgiving of your mistakes, because when we love a brand, we are, right? They just had a bad day,
Yeah.
you know? So I think that really is at the heart of it. And I've been a critic on LinkedIn. You know, look, there's a lot of influencers, a lot of CX people. They have a good message, but we're on rinse and repeat right now. We're just rehashing all the same stuff over the last 20 years. And that's kind of what we're looking to do, is how do we shake it up? How do we stop talking about just the jargon and CX is good and blah, blah, blah. How do we start really showing tangible return on investment? That's what I want to be able to do. I want a company to be able to say, we focused on this particular service metric, whatever it is. We tied that back to revenue, which is difficult in some way, but this is what we're seeing. I think the best metric that's been out there for 20 years is NPS, right? Which I believe, don't quote me on it, says for every 7% increase in your net promoter score, you can associate a 1% revenue increase to that. But that was built 25 years ago. I don't know if that's still the case or not. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to try to help our brands and people really start tying back tangible improvement, revenue, speak their language, revenue increases associated with great customer service. And I think that's the kind of the holy grail of all of us getting to, so that these companies become maniacally focused on the importance of the experience.
Yeah. And pro tip, quit bastardizing NPS. Do it the right way. Because I mean, really, that's what's happened is companies have begun to focus so much on the survey and the results of the survey, and not the whole point of it is to make actionable changes. And you see this in, hop on LinkedIn, you'll see it. And I've talked about it too. Automotive industry is horrible about it, right? It's, we've got to stop incenting the people who are delivering the service strictly on these survey results. If you're going to do the survey, do it right.
That's right.
So that you can make actionable changes. And I think that's where a lot of leaders are questioning the metrics. It's not because you can't tie it. It's because the way we've gone about gathering the metrics have changed, and the data is no longer reliable in a lot of cases.
Most people who I was just on the phone with a client, a CEO of a client, and we were talking about some stuff, and they were like, well, we're continuing to get these really bad reviews on Google, right? I said, okay. So I went and looked at a couple of their locations, and they had 400 or 500 reviews, right, on Google over the course of 5 years. 5 years, 400 or 500 reviews. And so my question to that CEO was, how many people flow through your building every day? Thousands. So just call it, at the end of the day, you got 50,000 people flowing through a location, right? And that location has 4 reviews. So what you're telling me is those 4 negative reviews are driving you to change your whole entire business or think differently because 4 people complain. And this is the downside with social media, right? Because you never hear from the 90% of your real customer, because survey processes are cumbersome, they're silly, people won't do them. If you can get to those people and establish a relationship where they're giving you real feedback, it changes the game when it comes to the type of feedback you're getting. And that's the other thing. Think about that. So many companies are relying on social media monitoring where they're getting a tiny fraction of the opinion of the people that they're serving, but they take it as gospel. And that's a problem with it too, right? And so I agree with you, is that, stop the survey begging. I hate that. They give me 5 stars when I walk in. Let your teams know the importance of service. Ask, because it's a motivating thing too. Like on our survey program, 65% of what we get are positive things about that server or that frontline worker, right? And so it's a motivating tool. But if you ask a frontline worker how they feel about surveys, they glaze over, because all they ever hear is all the negative stuff that they get.
Yeah.
You don't get those positive things that often, and brands would be wise to do that. I'll say this, and I know we're coming up on time, Rob, but the least important person in any organization is the C team, because they are not driving the day-to-day business. The most important people in any business are the servers, the bartenders, the frontline workers, the cashiers that are making minimum wage, but are responsible for getting people into that location. And it irritates me. I'm getting on a soapbox for a minute because we got it backwards, right? We're paying CEOs millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I get it. It's important to set the strategy and the vision and all that. But the frontline worker who's doing all of the work gets nothing. They get nothing. And so businesses have to change their opinion about that. They have to say, we're not just employee centric, but we're putting real investment into these people who are responsible for getting people in and creating this experience. And oftentimes they don't do that at all. They don't give them the tools, they don't give them the resources, they don't give them the enforcement to be able to go and create that experience. So that's a really passionate topic for me, that we've got to have businesses start thinking again that it's not me, the CEO, it's the frontline worker who I should be paying a tremendous amount of attention to, lauding with praise and training, because they're the ones that are going to make that location successful or not.
Yeah, I am 100% on board with that. Chris, awesome to chat with you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Obviously, all my listeners know that they can go to the show notes and find your LinkedIn. Go take a look at a closer look.
That's right.
In fact, take a closer look at a closer look.
Just remember, it's www.a-closer-look.com. So it's a little bit, but check us out on LinkedIn. We do a lot of work postings on LinkedIn because we love that channel in terms of just engagement. And we try to do a lot of stuff for free. So we put out surveys and reports and things that we want, because we're trying to help the industry, right? Like if you like what we do and you want to talk to us about business, that's awesome. But more importantly, what we're trying to do is just get subject matter expertise out there so that we can help people really start to understand that CX is, we got to stop talking about it. We got to start showing what it looks like.
Thanks, Chris. That is
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Advice. And thank you again for being on Next in Queue.
Thank you for having me.
Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy To and is produced by me, Rob Dwyer. If you enjoy this podcast, please by all means subscribe and or rate this podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. But more importantly, please tell just one person about this podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. As always, thanks for listening.